Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the online class for the students of Honours third year of Dhaka Mohanagar Mohila College. I hope all of you are healthy and hearty by the grace of Almighty Allah. With you, I am Shabnam, lecturer in English at Dhaka Mohanagar Mohila College. I hope your study is going well, and you will be able to sit for the upcoming exam, which will be held in due time. But today you will get in this video the writer of Oroonoko, that means a short biography of Afra Ben, who is also the author or writer of the novel Oroonoko. So let's proceed with the short biography of Afra Ben. Afra Ben, who was born on 14 December 1640 and died on 16 April 1689, was an English playwright, poet, translator, and fiction writer from the Restoration period. As one of the first English women to earn her living by her writing, she broke cultural barriers and served as a literary role model for later generations of women authors. Rising from obscurity, she came to the notice of Charles II, who employed her as a spy in Antwerp. Upon her return to London and a probably brief stay in Debtor's prison, she began writing for the stage. She belonged to a coterie of poets and famous libertines such as John Wilmot, Lord Rochester. She wrote under the pastoral pseudonym Astrea. During the turbulent political times of the Exclusion Crisis, she wrote an epilogue and prologue that brought her into legal trouble. She thereafter devoted most of her writing to prose genres and translations. A staunch supporter of the Stuart line, she declined an invitation from Bishop Burnet to write a welcoming poem to the new King William III. She died shortly after that. She is remembered in Virginia Woolf's In a Room of One's Own. All women together ought to let flowers fall upon the tomb of Afra Ben, which is most scandalously but rather appropriately in Westminster Abbey, for it was she who earned them the right to speak their minds. Her grave is not included in the Poets' Corner but lies in the east cloister near the steps of the church. Now, about her earlier lives. Information regarding Ben's life is obscure, especially regarding her early lives or early years. This may be due to intentional obscuring on Ben's part. Several versions say different things. One version of Ben's life tells that she was born to a barber named John Amis and his wife Amy. She is occasionally referred to as Afra Amis Ben. Another version says that Ben born to a couple named Cooper. The histories and novels of the late ingenious Mrs. Ben states that Ben was born to Bartholomew Johnson, a barber, and Elizabeth Denham, a wet nurse. Colonel Thomas Culpeper, the only person who claimed to have known her as a child, wrote in Adversaria that she was born at Starry or Canterbury to a Mr. Johnson and that she had a sister named Frances. Another contemporary version says that Anna Finch wrote that Ben was born in Way in Kent, the daughter of a barber. In some accounts, the profile of her father fits Ephraim Johnson. However, Ben was born during the build-up of the English Civil War, a child of the political tensions of the time. One version of Ben's story or Ben's earlier life has her traveling with Bartholomew Johnson to the small English colony of Wilby Land, later captured by the Dutch and renamed Suriname. He was said to die on the journey with his wife and children, spending some months in the country, though there is no evidence of this. During this trip, Ben said she met an African slave leader whose story formed the basis for one of her most famous works, that is Oroonoko. It is possible that she acted as a spy in the colony. There is little verification evidence to confirm any of her story. In Oroonoko, Ben gives herself the position of narrator, and her first biographer accepted the assumption that Ben was the daughter of the Lieutenant General of Suriname. As in the story, there is little evidence that this was the case, and none of her contemporaries acknowledge any aristocratic status. There is also no evidence that Oroonoko existed as an actual person or that any such slave revolt as is featured in the story really happened. Shortly after her supposed return to England from Suriname in 1664, Ben may have married John Ben. He may have been a merchant of German or Dutch extraction, possibly from Hamburg. He died or the couple separated soon after 1664. However, from this point the writer used Mrs. Ben as her professional name. By 1666, Ben had become attached to the court, possibly through the influence of Thomas Culpeper and other associates. The Second Anglo-Dutch War had broken out between England and the Netherlands in 1665, and she was recruited as political spy in Antwerp on behalf of King Charles II, possibly under the auspices of courtier Thomas Killigrew. This is the first well documented account we have of her activities. Her codename is said to have been Astrea, a name under which she had later published many of her writings. Her chief role was to establish an intimacy with William Scott, son of Thomas Scott. Scott was believed to be ready to become a spy in English service and to report on the doings of the English exiles who were plotting against the king. Ben arrived in Bruges in 1666, probably with two others, as London was racked with plague and fire. Ben's job was to turn Scott into a double agent, but there is evidence that Scott betrayed her to the Dutch. Forced by Dept and her husband's death, later Ben began to work for the King's Company and the Duke's Company as a scribe. She had, however, written poetry up until this point, while she is recorded to have written before she adopted her Dept. Ben became friends with the notable writers of the John Dryden, Elizabeth Barry, John Hyle, and Thomas Otway, and Edward Ravenscroft, and was acknowledged as a part of the circle of the Earl of Rochester. Ben often used her writings to attack the parliamentary Whigs, claiming in public spirits called good of the Commonwealth. So, though by different ways, the fever sees in all its one and the same mad disease. This was Ben's reproach to Parliament, which was denied by the King's funds. Her final years and death. In 1668, in the year before her death, she published A Discovery of the New Worlds. This is a translation of French popularization of astronomy. During 1670s and 1680s, she was one of the most productive playwrights in Britain, second only to the poet laureate John Dryden. In the last 4 years, Ben's health began to fail, beset by poverty and debt, but she continued to write ferociously, though it became increasingly hard for her to hold a pen. In her final days, she wrote the translation of the final book of Abraham Cowley's 6 books of plants. She died on 16 April 1689 and was buried in East Cloister, Westminster Abbey. The inscriptions of her tombstone reads "Here lies a proof that wit can never be defense enough against mortality." She was quoted as stating that she has led a life dedicated to pleasure and poetry. Now let's proceed to her published works. Ben earned a living through writing, one of the earliest English women to do so. After John Dryden, she was the most prolific writer of the English period of Restoration. Ben was not the first woman in England to publish a play. In 1630, Lady Elizabeth Cary had published the tragedy of Miriam. In the 1650s, Margaret Cavendish published 2 volumes of plays, and in 1663, a translation of Cornelius Pompey by Catherine Phillips was performed in Dublin and London. Women had been excluded from theatre in the Elizabethan era, but in Restoration England they made up a significant part of the audience and professional actresses played the women's part. This changed the nature and themes of Restoration theatre. Ben's first play, The Forced Marriage, was a romantic tragicomedy on arranged marriages and was staged on the Duke's Company in September 1670. The performance ran for 6 nights, which was regarded as a good run for an unknown author. 6 months later, Ben's play, The Amorous Prince, was successfully staged. Again, Ben used the play to comment on the harmful effects of arranged marriages. Ben did not hide the fact that she was a woman, instead, she made a point of it. When in 1673 the Dorset Garden Theatre staged The Dutch Lover, critics sabotaged the play on the grounds that the author was a woman. Ben tackled the critics head on in Epistle of the Reader. She argued that women had been held back by their unjust exclusion from education, not their lack of ability. After a 3-year publication pause, Ben published 4 plays in close succession. In 1676, she published Abdelazar, The Town Fop, and The Rover. In early 1678, Circassian Fancy was published. This succession of box office successes led to frequent attacks on Ben. She was attacked for her private life. The morality of her plays was questioned and she was accused of plagiarizing. The Rover. Ben countered these public attacks in the prefaces of her published plays. In the preface to Circassian Fancy, she argued that she was being singled out because she was a woman, while male playwrights were free to live the most scandalous lives and write bawdy plays. Under Charles II of England, prevailing Puritan ethics was reserved in the fashionable society of London. The king associated with playwrights that poured scorn on marriage and the idea of consistency in love. Among the king's favourite was the Earl of Rochester, John Wilmot, who became famous for his cynical libertinism. Ben was a friend of Wilmot, and Ben became a bold proponent of sexual freedom for both women and men. Like her contemporary male libertines, she wrote freely about sex. In the infamous poem The Disappointment, she wrote a comic account of male importance from a woman's perspective. Critics Lisa and Peter Thomas contend that the poem playfully and wittily questions conventional gender roles and the structures of oppression which they support. In The Dutch Lover, the Ben forthrightly acknowledged female sexual desire. Critics of Ben were provided with ammunition because of her public liaison with John Hawley, a bisexual lawyer who scandalized his contemporaries. By the late 60s-70s, Ben was among the leading playwrights of England. Her plays were staged frequently and attended by the king. The Rover became a favorite at the king's court. Ben became heavily involved in the political debate about the succession. Because Charles II had no heir, a prolonged political crisis ensued. Mass hysteria commenced as in 1678 the rumored popish plot suggested the king should be replaced with his Roman Catholic brother James. Political parties developed. The Whigs wanted to exclude James, while the Tories did not believe succession should be altered in any way. Charles II eventually dissolved the Cavalier Parliament and James II succeeded him in 1685. Ben supported the Tory position and in the 2 years between 1681 and 1682 produced 5 plays to discredit the Whigs. The London audience, mainly Tory sympathizers, attended the plays in large numbers, but Ben was arrested on the order of King Charles II when she used one of the plays to attack James Scott, Duke of Monmouth, the illegitimate son of the king. As audience numbers declined, theatres staged mainly old works to save cost. Nevertheless, Ben published The Lucky Chance in 1686. In response to the criticism levelled at the play, she articulated a long and passionate defense of women writers. Her play, The Emperor of the Moon, was published and staged in 1687. It became one of her longest-running plays. Ben stopped writing plays and turned to prose fiction. Today she is mostly known for her novels she wrote in the later part of her life. Her first novel was the three-part Love Letters Between a Nobleman and His Sister, published between 1682 and 1687. The novels were inspired by a contemporary scandal which saw Lord Grey elope with his sister-in-law, Lady Henrietta Berkeley. At the time of publication, Love Letters was very popular and went through more than 16 editions. Today, Ben's prose work is critically acknowledged as having been important to the development of the English novel. Following Ben's death, new female dramatists such as Delarivier Manley, Mary Peake, Suzanne, and Catherine Trotter acknowledged Ben as their most vital predecessor who opened a public space for women writers. In 1688, less than a year before her death, Ben published Oroonoko, or The Royal Slave, the story of the enslaved Oroonoko and his love Imoinda. It was based on Ben's travel to Suriname 20 years earlier. The novel became a great success. In 1696, it was adapted for the stage by Thomas Southern and continuously performed throughout the 18th century. In 1745, the novel was translated into French, going through 7 French editions. As abolitionism gathered pace in the late 18th century, the novel was celebrated as the first anti-slavery novel. So that's all for today and enough for today. We will discuss more about Oroonoko or about the theme of the novel Oroonoko in my next videos. Till then, stay at home and be safe. Thank you.